All right, let's welcome back Murat of The Athletic and chop it up after the Jets finished off the Calgary Flames in an interesting game last night, and in a lot of ways, somewhat of a dress rehearsal for next Wednesday's season opener against the Anaheim Ducks without Mark Scheifele. Let's welcome in Murat right now. Murat, how are you, my friend? It's great to have you back on the program. What's going on?
Great to be back. I'm doing well. I'm fired up. Just came from camp. Haven't seen you since before your Ryder Cup adventures, so I'm happy to talk Jets and happy to see you again as well.
Well, it's all happening right now. It's a really exciting time, and especially for Winnipeg Jet fans. And we've had a lot of conversations all summer long since the additions of Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon and Paul Stastny coming back, that there justifiably was reason, to think that this team might be able to take a big step forward. It's tough to make any deductions based on preseason hockey. I get it. One thing, though, I'm pretty confident is that Nikolaj Ehlers is ready to go for game number 1 of 82. Let's start off there with Ehlers' performance last night, Murat.
I mean, the guy is spectacular. The guy is flat out spectacular. He has incredible pace. He transitions the puck as well as Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Matthew Barzal. That's a specific skill set. I'm not saying he's as good as those first two players, but in terms of his transition game, you count entries and controlled entries and the chances to come out of that. Nick Ehlers is an elite player. You see it demonstrated in preseason. Yeah, sure, it's just preseason. Sure, the defense isn't as tight. You could ask Ehlers' buddy Patrick Laine about that after the goal he scored about defenses as well. But Ehlers flying through the neutral zone, teeing himself up, taking that shot, that's a bullet. He's dominant on the Ehlers power play. We'll call it power play 1 for the time being because that's how good it is. Schmidt and Morrissey are clicking there as well. But Ehlers is part of everything good that happens with that unit. He's part of almost everything good that happens at 5-on-5 as well. I think this is the season where, beyond Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Blake Wheeler, who other teams game plan for and know about and are certainly established stars in the NHL, I mean, we know about Nick Ehlers. I think this is the year that the rest of the league finds out just how special of a player he is.
Yeah, we'll get to the power play in a second. Of course, our offseason conversations have also revolved around what's up with Pierre Luc Dubois. What sort of a player does he come in to be? I mean, from my perspective, a pretty good camp. But knowing that he's going to be playing with Nikolaj Ehlers, I'm not sure he could be in a better situation to get past last season and really start off well with the guy that's going the way we saw 27 going last night. What do you think about those two guys playing together, and just your observations on the man now wearing number 80 for the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, first of all, classy move on Dubois' part to choose number 80 in honor of his friend. But also in terms of generating chemistry with the new team, right? I mean, he's learning to play with guys like Nick Ehlers. He's learning to play in the Jets system. Ideally, he's a step ahead because of good health and because he's having a full camp and full preseason, all of that. But I think about what could be a good situation for him. And if you're learning lessons about a new team, you want to be in as many good situations as possible. What better than a zone entry wizard like Nick Ehlers, where you're actually going to get more looks in the offensive zone, which means more opportunities to sort out when do you go here, when do you hold the puck on the wall, when do you cut back, when do you drive the net. He's going to be in the offensive zone more simply by having Ehlers as his line mate, and also by playing on this version of the Winnipeg Jets as well that's transitioning the puck and has an improved defense as well. So I think we're going to have, I'm not predicting outright dominance out of the gate. I haven't seen that from Pierre Luc Dubois quite yet. I think he's a little bit quicker than last year. I think he's putting defenders on his back a little bit, and certainly he's a powerful player as well. But I think that the best thing that you could say about that partnership is it's going to put Dubois in good positions to figure it out. And maybe this is a slow burn of a year where he builds step by step by step by step. And, by about midseason, we're looking at Pierre Luc Dubois and we're thinking, gosh, that guy looks like a lot like the impact player he was for the Columbus Blue Jackets for so long. I think that's the best case scenario.
Well, and while we're staying on Ehlers, let's talk about the power play, because it was a little different and everything was different when Mark Scheifele's not in the lineup. And that was, a significant change, and one that we're going to see in game number 1. But it was interesting to see how the power play unit with Ehlers was working with both Schmidt and Morrissey on it. We've seen mainly 4 forwards and 1 defenseman on the Jet power play units for the last couple seasons. This is the first time with the wrinkle involving Schmidt and Morrissey. But what I found interesting was the rotation on that power play, where a lot of times we'd be seeing Josh Morrissey ending up going down low past the hash marks, working around with Ehlers coming back in. Again, we're going to see this count for real come regular season time. But from what we've seen so far, what do you make up of that unit right now with Nate Schmidt coming in? And do you think that will be the way we get into the season, or is it still sort of a work in progress from your perspective?
Well, from where I sit, early returns are really good with that unit. I mean, certainly the offense is there. You know, we can watch them and the production, I think, is going to be there. But I think stylistically, there was some concern because Josh Morrissey had a lot of time on the top power play unit last year. He's played a lot of power play minutes recently, and it hasn't always looked dominant from him. You know, I think last year was a bit of a struggle for him at that role at times. And so there's a little bit of a question when you pencil him in immediately to one of the top power play units. How's that going to go? You have Nate Schmidt coming in, and he's new to the team. So how's that going to go, though he's renowned a little bit for his offensive instincts? And I think what we found so far, and I'll take this right from day one of camp, Josh Morrissey has looked quicker and more assertive. I've said that a couple of times, and I believe it. Moving throughout camp as well, they worked on the power play often, and Josh Morrissey has done exactly what you said. He's ended up at the face-off dot, essentially, below the hash marks, and he's found himself a little bit of an office there, where Josh Morrissey isn't the number one puck distributor on that unit, which I think is a good thing. He's worked on his shot instead, and he's been, in practice, wiring bar-down shots on any goaltender, including Connor Hellebuyck, teed up by Nate Schmidt. And I think what Schmidt has brought is this quickness of decision-making. It gets on a Schmidt stick and off of it quickly and creatively. He's a shifty skater. He can move side to side. He's got a lot of head fakes as well. I mean, he often passes to where he isn't looking. There's just lots of deception from him. And you saw a couple of plays last night where Schmidt plays catch with Nick Ehlers and then fires a quick one-touch pass to Josh Morrissey. Or he's shooting into space on one-timers, but they're not blasts. They're for redirection from Paul Stastny. And I think Schmidt running things at the top, in addition to having the weapon that is Nick Ehlers, and in addition to Josh Morrissey picking a very specific role, that shot from that spot, and he's worked on it. Let me tell you, it looks good. This is a great version of the Josh Morrissey shot. I think they've all sort of found a niche, and the more that they can play with that, the more dangerous they can be. The more dangerous they are, the more chance it's the number one unit at times as well.
Well, speaking of Morrissey, I really enjoyed first off, Dom Lucian does an amazing job with The Athletic, and he's made myself and a lot of Athletic subscribers a lot of money over the last few years with the number of his picks, because he has been killing it, and he's got a great system, and he's a really, really bright mind. But again, when you're talking about every single team, you'll be right on stuff, you'll whiff on others, and I really enjoyed your piece in The Athletic, kind of picking apart some of his predictions for the Winnipeg Jets. And one of the things you focused in on was Josh Morrissey. And the Lucian has him basically painted as some ham and egger you could replace with some guy off the street. I think we all know that that is not the case, but there is some recency bias in all of that. It hasn't been great for Josh the last couple seasons, but from what you've seen in this preseason, how optimistic are you that we see more of the Josh Morrissey that really shone early in his career, playing with higher quality partners, now that he's got some solid dudes beside him, both on the power play, but especially at 5-on-5?
Yeah, I mean, context matters a ton, and that's what I put the bulk of that argument behind. And I like the way that you framed Dom. I mean, he's right about a lot of things, and his models have outperformed
That's
Vegas.
what scares me when he says something like that.
But like the game of predicting NHL hockey is chaotic, and it's not about being right all the time. It's about being wrong less often than everybody else. And Dom is great at that. And then as well, he has a humility to him, where in the comments to his piece, he's saying, well, you know what, I am not on the ground in Winnipeg. I don't have the X's and O's sorted. So, by all means, if there's more information out there, let's talk about it. And that's what I sought to do in that piece. And I think in Josh Morrissey, there's plenty more information. We all know that certainly he was dealing with the health status of his dad and the eventual passing of his father, Tom, this summer. That may have an impact on the way that a player plays. I believe that it would, but that's difficult to quantify, and I really can't speak to that, what Josh would have been going through in that context. On the ice, we can speak to it in a big way. And what projection models do a great job of is figuring out what's important and making bets on it. They do it by leaning heavily on the most recent season and a little bit on 2 seasons ago as well. And then the further you go away in history, the less relevant that stuff is to guessing how good a guy's going to be. But what's happened in Josh Morrissey's 2 most recent seasons? He's gone from an assertive, communicative, top-flight partner in Jacob Trouba, with which he had a couple years to get to know, to a rotating door, predominantly led by Tucker Poolman, who's a gamer and a good player, but who had only ever had success at a third-pairing level. The jump in competition from third pair to first pair is incredible at the NHL. There really is, for most teams, a division in top 4 and the bottom pair. So that was a lot to ask of Tucker Poolman. And not only that, but I don't think that they had their wires exactly crossed perfectly in terms of their communication, in terms of their chemistry as well, which is a big deal. And your partner has a lot to do with your success. I think Josh Morrissey at times was guilty of trying to overcorrect, do too much for the fact that he had a less experienced partner than himself. And as well, the Jets as a whole were spending so much time in their own zone. If there is ever a situation for a model to lean too hard at a player's flaws and the bad numbers that he's genuinely put up in terms of expected goals, all that stuff, it's Josh Morrissey going against top competition every single night, not only with Tucker Poolman, sometimes with Dmitry Kulikov, sometimes you see Ville Heinola, or that one game where Sami Niku was up there for some reason, Nathan Beaulieu playing with an injured shoulder as well, a torn labrum. I mean, it was not a great context. And now to watch him play with Nate Schmidt, there's something else altogether. The Jets are playing a more aggressive system at both ends of the rink. The puck movement is there. The communication is there. Schmidt's a communicator and assertive. Everything that I just said he didn't have in the past 2 seasons is there. And Huss, I know this is a monologue, but the question you asked me was, how optimistic am I? Well, Josh Morrissey is better than a replacement level top 4 defenseman in the NHL. I can say that unequivocally. At the end of this season, we're going to look at him as a guy who helped the Winnipeg Jets win games. Is he that top pair stud that we thought he might become based on his early years? I'm not correcting all the way in that direction. I'm just saying a reason to be optimistic about Winnipeg is they didn't just add Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon. They added Josh Morrissey playing in a great context. He's put in the work on the summer as well. His shot's off right now, or on right now. He's going off right now. He looks good. I think he'll have a good year.
Yeah, and I think it's just, I mean, it's apparent when you see him out there right now. I mean, there's a different confidence level with the partner that he's playing, and I think there's an aggressiveness that just simply wasn't there. I mean, you spoke to some of the situations that he was in. I mean, a lot of times the air was on the side of passivity, in that, you know, you just didn't want to be out of the wrong spot because you knew you were kind of pulling a lot of weight on the back end. It seems like he's sort of freed up a little bit more to do it. And I think he's probably got a bit of a chip on his shoulder as well, because, I mean, he's a smart guy. He knows that the results weren't there for all sorts of reasons, but knows that there's a big opportunity going forward to put all that in the rearview mirror starting next Wednesday in Anaheim.
Yeah, exactly right. If you could cherry pick, you know, your ideal partner type for Josh Morrissey, I mean, maybe you just start with the Norris winners, and that would be the truth for any player. But yeah, I think somebody as lighthearted, as assertive, as confident, as talkative on the ice as Nate Schmidt is, probably a great fit. And, you know, the puck movement and all of that, you know, on top of that, I think there's a lot of reasons to think that should be a solid top 4 pairing this year.
Murat Atesh of The Athletic with us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. On Monday, Murat had a great piece, post cuts, on, you know, how everything is shaking out, the final battles for camp. And really, it's similar to what we've been talking about for the last few weeks. We knew it would come down to this, a small group of players fighting for that third line spot, along with Adam Lowry, and 3 spots on the fourth line. And, you know, Maurice basically said that he was in some ways telegraphing at least where his mind is right now with last night's roster without Mark Scheifele, and how that would change with Paul Stastny moving up. But it was Christian Vesalainen who was out there. Now, I know you had tweeted this out. Did we come to a conclusion on the first goal? I mean, certainly I was in transit coming to the game late after something else earlier. And it certainly was described like this was maybe Vesalainen's best shift, took out 2 defensemen, got the puck to Lowry over. They strangely gave the assist to Jansen Harkins. I'm not sure whether that got changed later on. It didn't look like that was where the assist was. But let's talk about Vesalainen's performance last night and where he's at in the mix to potentially start on the third line with Adam Lowry and what we've seen so far through the preseason.
Yeah, I'll start with the goal. And I was of the mind, having watched it, that, you know, I don't know that he actually outmuscled anybody on the wall when there were 2 guys on him. And I don't know that he made that drop pass to Adam Lowry. I do know that the goal doesn't happen without Vesalainen on the forecheck being in that position in the first place, such that the second Flames defenseman can leave Lowry all alone for some reason and overcommit to Christian Vesalainen. I mean, that's what happens when you genuinely believe that a player is a threat. And I think Christian Vesalainen was playing aggressively. He was forechecking. He was in on the wall, and he helped create that goal. I don't know what the end result is. We'll have to ask him at some point the next time we talk to him. Did he touch it? What was the play on that? Harkins gets the assist because he was in on the forecheck on the other wall, and I guess was the last player on the Jets team to touch it. I'm not too sure. I will say that all three of those players had a role on the goal. All three looked strong. And for Vesalainen, it's an interesting situation. You know, in a perfect scenario, what they want from him. He's a big player. He can move reasonably well. He's not a burner. He's certainly not, but he's a big player. He has been known for offense at younger levels of play, especially in Finland. He's got a shot. And Paul Maurice is tipping his hand in all sorts of ways. He told us flat out, this version of the Adam Lowry line isn't going to be second over the boards after Mark Scheifele like it used to be. It's not going to be matchup shutdown going against the McDavids and Crosbys of the world, but he will use it against size wherever possible. He will use it in that context. And that's why Christian Vesalainen is getting that first long look at third line right wing. At the same time, I think it's safe to say Jansen Harkins has outplayed him through camp so far. He's looked faster. He's looked more dangerous with the puck. He might not have the shot that Vesalainen has, but he's putting himself in position to use his own shot and his own skills more often. And you saw that getting set up by Svechnikov, about a week ago at this point. So it was interesting for me to see them all on the same line together. And I thought that it was Christian Vesalainen's best game because whether or not he touched that puck, he was in on the forecheck. Those three were looking pretty good. And I think we can expect exactly that trio of Harkins, Lowry, and Vesalainen to open the season with Scheifele's absence in game one.
Let's assume that Svechnikov gets his deal signed before game one. And I know there's some cap issues that, may affect that when a contract is signed. But let's assume that for a moment. Is he in the top 12 for game one in your mind?
In my mind, based on his performance, he is. Absolutely, he is. I have time for the argument that he's actually been more impressive than Christian Vesalainen, although we should be cautious that a lot of his production has come against that sort of AHL tweener group as well. So it's tough to read into too much. But I think in terms of performance, he's earned a look in the top 12. The issue is if you're not giving him that third line role, which Paul Maurice has said he wants to be able to match up against size, Svechnikov isn't a large, imposing player, then from the Jets roster construction purposes, the only thing that's left is fourth line right wing. And I don't know that that's the skill set that Paul Maurice or anybody really has envisioned for that trio. I think Jansen Harkins is a lock. I think Riley Nash, is a lock. He may even see some third line right wing time as the season goes on if Paul Maurice is looking for that veteran. And then it's between Toninato, who has done some good things, Svechnikov, who's definitely done some good things. I don't think David Gustafsson's in that mix anymore. It's tough. I envision, Svechnikov in the mix to be sure. He's earned that look. But if the Jets sign him to an AHL deal off the hop, maybe the plan is for him to be as close to an elite offensive talent as possible for Cole Perfetti to be playing with the Moose this year.
Well, that is interesting. And it's the addition of Svechnikov. I think you mentioned David Gustafsson, who kind of throughout camp has never really seemed to, get his head above that fifth line spot where he sort of is scheduled in right now. But I will say this, if there's the potential that Riley Nash moves on to that third line, I think all of a sudden the opportunity for Gustafsson maybe to be in the mix a little bit more. But I don't think from an organizational perspective, they're thinking that the best spot for David Gustafsson is to be a 13th forward, to be spending a ton of time in the press box.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that, you're right to point at the lines that he's played on. I think he's played well in camp, but you don't shine when you're playing with AHL veterans against players of that same caliber. I mean, when you end up with Harkins, Perfetti, and Svechnikov going to town against some of the tweener level competition that they did, you can imagine that the opposite of that is true when you're playing a little bit lower down the depth chart. And Gustafsson has never escaped from that. I think it's a tell. Paul Maurice has also said about Gustafsson that he does look for more minutes for him, and that's probably going to be in the AHL. I thought heading into camp that based on his AHL excellent so far to his career. Gusavsson might be in the mix for a fourth-line center job, maybe even if everything went perfectly for him, that third-line right-wing job, because he's so defensively sound. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think he's your matchup center in the AHL as much as possible. And, for one more year, I think that's an acceptable look for the player. I believe in players playing big minutes until they're simply too good for them. And I think he's right in his wheelhouse if he does that this year.
It was interesting to hear Coach, I believe it was yesterday, speaking about the players that are with the team right now, saying all of these players are going to play games for the Winnipeg Jets at some point this season. And of course, Cole Perfetti is part of that group right now. I make no conclusions about what will happen later on in the season. There's so many things that can happen with injuries, with play, all of that. But short term, next couple weeks, including the opener without Mark Scheifele, what do you think happens to Perfetti? Is he on the roster at that point? Does he play a game early in the season? Or will he start the season, do you think, with the Manitoba Moose and be there for a call-up when the situation arises?
Well, step by step, the first issue is that day one roster, and I think the deadline for that is Monday. And the day one roster that Winnipeg files doesn't have to be what they play with against Anaheim later that same week. But it will be about maximizing LTIR, getting as close to the cap, as close to the cap plus Brian Little's contract as possible before putting Brian Little on LTIR. All of that roster rigmarole will impact that first, the last cuts that we see in the first roster that we see officially. Then moving the next step into that game one. Well, now it's kind of interesting because without Scheifele, I know it's perfectly likely we see exactly the lineup we saw last night against Calgary. Paul Maurice tipping his hand as well. But there's a chance that we see Cole Perfetti draw in at that stage. There's a chance that we see Cole Perfetti at some point over the next week or so. I think that he will play his first NHL game this season. And I don't think that he'll stick around for an extended period of time because, the number one center, or at least the number one offensive center job is right there for him with the Moose. No matter, I mentioned Svechnikov earlier, even if it isn't him, Manitoba's stacked this year in a way that it hasn't been for a little while. And Cole Perfetti will be able to put himself in all sorts of tough situations, playing with good finishers, playing with, highly talented players. And if the Jets see him as a long-term center, which I still think that there's a chance, as opposed to him being shoved off to left wing, which I'm sure is a realistic possibility, well, then what better situation than to play big minutes, all situations as much as possible with the Manitoba Moose, which is going to be an excellent, possibly even a Calder Cup contender this year. I think that's where we're going to see him play for the Winnipeg Jets, but we'll see him play more for the Moose.
Hey, the one guy we probably don't talk about as much as we should because he is about as reliable as death and taxes as Connor Hellebuyck in the net. But I do want to go back to your piece on Dom's predictions, because as much as Jet fans may have been nervous when they saw, his thoughts on Josh Morrissey and what we've talked about before, his predictions for Connor Hellebuyck should absolutely get Jet fans. Can you dive into a little bit about what Dom has to say for the upcoming season for number 37?
Well, first and foremost, there's no way around it. He has Connor Hellebuyck as literally the best goaltender in the planet this season. And I think that that's entirely possible. I think that what we've seen from him over the past 3 years, from Vezina finalist status in 2017 all through, his Vezina win, even last season, I know the save percentage went down, but we saw the defense, right? We saw where the chances were coming from. We saw what quality there was. And so when you're using a model to project goaltending, the first thing to acknowledge is that goaltending is a mad science. Nobody has it exactly right and perfect. The second is you start looking for things, and it's more than just goals against average. That's an ancient stat. It's more than just save percentage. Now they're trying to use quality of shot to estimate how good these guys are, expected goals, that kind of thing. And Dom's model leans heavily on expected goals. We know that Winnipeg gave up a ton of shots from high danger areas last year, the center slot. We know there were a lot of opportunities. We know there were a lot of rebound opportunities. Those pucks weren't getting cleared. So Connor Hellebuyck for the last few years has saved more goals than he should have, time and time and time again, especially if you use the mathematical models, which makes him look like literally the best goaltender in the planet. And I think that is a realistic assessment of what he's in contention for this year, but it's also going to be a different ballgame for him. We saw it against Calgary last night. There are going to be long stretches where he doesn't face a shot. There's going to be a different game for him to play. I think he's going to be in contention for best goaltender of the NHL this year. Dom assumes, based on the amount of expected goals that Winnipeg's given up and the amount of saves that he's made, he'll be the best one. Well, there's a little bit of error for that. It could be Vasilevsky. It could be anybody. And I guess what I say, if you're looking at it from a model projection, you're looking at Dom's projections. Well, he undersells Josh Morrissey a bit in my mind. So, okay, maybe add a little bit to what he says the Jets should be able to do. But it's a bold claim to say best on the planet for sure in goaltending, where anything can happen, any bounce can happen. So you might shave that down a little bit as well, depending on your confidence levels. The one thing is, if that's where your starting point is, possibly the best that there is, it's just another feather in the cap of, a great goaltender and one who could be that great.
Hey, I know we've talked a lot about some of the numbers and some of the interesting contexts of the Jets going into this season. This is one that I don't think we can look to any numbers, but I'm interested in your perspective on it, Murat. For players like Mark Scheifele, Nikolaj Ehlers, Connor Hellebuyck, Kyle Connor, even Blake Wheeler, how do you think the prospect of going to the Olympic Games will affect, if at all, what we see from those players individually, as well as teammates, in the first 30, 40 games before everyone either makes the team or doesn't make the team and goes off to China?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think I'd have to take it one by one. I think Nick Ehlers is just going to play his game. I have a hunch he's going to make Team Denmark no matter what happens.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, fingers crossed. Blake Wheeler is probably not a mortal lock like he used to be. I mean, the last time that, NHL players were at the Olympics, he certainly would have been. He would have been one of the best 5-on-5 players in the world. And I think USA should have used him a little bit more, if I'm being honest. But we shouldn't tell them that. Canada obviously won. So I think he's in a unique situation where he's on the cusp for the first time. And I think he probably makes that team. But I don't think he needs to play outside of himself at all to put himself in contention. If he stays healthy, if he gets back to having a reasonably good defensive impact, as he usually does until last season's issues, I think that who he is and his stature, what he's accomplished, will speak for itself. Kyle Connor, that's an interesting one. I think that based on the offense alone, it's hard to keep him out of consideration. I've seen lineups that leave him off, and I kind of laugh at those. If you look at offensive production for the American-born players, it's tough. But Paul Maurice has said the goal for him this season, the goal for Kyle Connor, is not just produce offensively, but give back a little bit less. And that's going to be a team focus for the Winnipeg Jets. If it goes well for the Winnipeg Jets, it will go well for Kyle Connor's reputation in terms of making Team USA. But the one that fascinates me is Mark Scheifele. When in his life has he ever not been a mortal lock for a team? And, when Team Canada is so good as it is, and there's a genuine chance, I think I've seen more rosters have him outside than on the team, that he doesn't make it. Well, how does that impact his psyche? And I think that for him, the wheelhouse of making that team is exactly the wheelhouse of improving the Winnipeg Jets. It's that same focus, playing that 200-foot game, making that extra back check. I asked Paul Maurice about it today, not using Mark Scheifele's name. I said, can you talk a little bit about players who in their mid-20s, early 30s, whatever age it is, who have been offensive stars, transform into realizing how important the 200-foot defensive game is? Because I think that that's exactly his goal for Mark Scheifele. He's getting to a point where those shift lengths are going to come down, and hopefully a season like this with so much on the line, you're going to see the best, most committed Scheifele that you've ever seen. That's the best case scenario. And I think there's a perfect Venn diagram of if it works out for Scheifele, it will work out for the Jets. And if it works out for both of those teams, it'll work out for Canada chances as well. Because he's not on the number one line with Nathan McKinnon. I was going to say, what about Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby? You know what I mean? He's not going to get cherry minutes. He's got to prove that he can do it all. And I think this is his best season to do it from a Jets perspective, too.
Hey, one more for you, and this has been a lot of fun. Speaking of Olympics, sad news about Carey Price earlier today, taking a leave from the team, dealing with some mental health issues. I think that, maybe this would be received very differently 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, but where we're at knowing about mental illness, I think it's been great to see the support for Carey Price. I think Carey Price is a lock for Team Canada if he is if he's playing and in a good spot, and we all hope that that will be the case. But let's take Price out for a minute, and I'll put you on the spot. Who's your starter in net for Canada? And I mean, do you have a ranking of players? I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury won the Vezina last year, and it's been a big topic. Many of the young goalies that we thought would maybe kind of announce themselves in the contention didn't. But you've got Carter Hart, Jordan Binnington, Mackenzie Blackwood, although he's out because he won't get the vaccine, so he can't go. We can kind of take his name out right now. If you had to tap, again, taking Price out of the equation, he's on the team and could very well be the starter if he's there and if he's healthy. After Price, how do you rank the Canadian goalies as of right now before we start the season?
I mean, that's a great and suddenly incredibly important question that I cannot even begin. This is something I should be looking at, because I agree with you. To hear you frame it like that, there was supposed to be that next generation by now. Carey Price, prior to the playoffs that he just had, I think that we've seen him age like a mortal, or at least occasionally play like one as well, as opposed to, being the best goaltender on the planet as he had been for some time there. And every player that you mentioned seems to have a question mark, whether it's Hart. He spent so much time this summer trying to retool every element of his game. I was reading all about it in 32 Thoughts. I think it was by Elliot Friedman, that's where that's in my head from, but also from Charlie O'Connor in Philadelphia for The Athletic.
He was like the worst goalie in the league last year, like by numbers alone. He had an .877 save percentage. I mean, he couldn't get it going. And I mean, of all the goalies, I think he was the guy, based on the previous 2 seasons he had coming into the league, that everyone thought would be, even if he was the third goalie, he'd be there solid, and they, might give him an opportunity. Based on what we saw last year, he's not at that point. Now, there's a lot of hockey to be played before they have to make those decisions. And I think Flyer fans and Canadians fans, Canada fans, would hope that he gets back to it. But there's a lot of work for Carter Hart to do, in my opinion, before he's even in the conversation, based on what we saw for the entirety of last year.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm Team Canada, I think, we saw that they made the first 3 announcements of Pietrangelo, Crosby, and McDavid. I think I'm saving goaltending for the last possible minute this year, because you want to see if Hart can reclaim his game. You want to see if Marc-Andre Fleury can do what he just did with a much less prolific defense than that of Vegas. You want to see if Jordan Binnington can reclaim his stature that he had not incredibly long ago as well. And I'm sure that there's even goaltenders, Canada has, we're not at, Juan and Brodeur status right now, I think, but we've produced enough throughout the NHL. There are guys that could go off in any given year, and maybe the play, unless there's something obvious that I'm missing, which is possible, is to wait a few months and see who is on fire, because goaltending is tough to predict and project. Even the very best ones have off years, and Canada, if there's a volume approach to it, then maybe there are guys who will storm out of the gate and are looking brilliant by December, January. Rosters are named.
Well, an interesting name that, to be honest, was not really on my radar. And frankly, I didn't even know what country he was from, but is Darcy Kemper. And I mean, Kemper, you want to talk about an opportunity to play a lot. I hear Francouz got injured again and is going to be out for a month. I mean, they are so invested in Darcy Kemper, and you want to talk about a guy that's going to have plenty of opportunity with lots of eyes on him to show that, he's able to be the guy behind a solid squad. It's going to be him in Colorado, because, presuming that he stays healthy, he'll probably be playing a Connor Hellebuyck-like workload or winning his fair share of games. And that will help him big time when it comes to Team Canada looking at, who's getting the job done right now in the National Hockey League. Doesn't hurt to be playing behind a team like the Avalanche.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, a juggernaut, which you expect Canada to be. And then Kemper's level has been incredible. I didn't know which country he was from either, if I'm being honest. I have seen him dominate and then get hurt, and then dominate some more and then get hurt. Kind of reminds me of Antti Raanta a little bit in that way, where they can be just so good for an extended period of times, and then they're just missing. And I guess that's another one where you kind of have to watch and see if he stays healthy. I think that this is what I have to do some writing. I got to be honest. I think that's what I get paid to do, like what puts money on my plate. But I think that's a little internet rabbit hole I'm going to have to go down later today.
Well, this Canadian Olympic team is going to be the gift that keeps on giving to those of us in the content business, because, there's very few hockey fans that you don't just bring up the topic and it spurns a whole bunch of other conversations like we just had. Murat, this was awesome. It's great to have you back on the program. Just quickly, what'd you see at practice today? I know Logan Stanley was back on non-contact jersey. Anything else of note, or a pretty run-of-the-mill skate after a game day?
Yeah, it was short. It was to the point. A lot of special teams work. My seat in the stands was right behind Blake Wheeler on the half wall, and I think this isn't news to anybody, but I got a ton of appreciation for just the amount of sticks and lanes that he has to navigate if he's finding Mark Scheifele across the ice. And now I started to wonder, if you're Pierre Luc Dubois in the middle and you've got a PK forward behind you and in front of you, and you're in the way kind of as well. Blake Wheeler's making that shot. From my perspective now, I'm like, I wonder what that guy can do to eat checks, knock sticks out of the way, and otherwise make that cross seam pass, a little bit more dangerous at a slightly higher rate, because we know how well that pass gets finished by shooters like Mark Scheifele. So that's what's in my head today. It's not news. I think everything else is as expected. But just to see it from not exactly, but close to Blake Wheeler's perspective, I have a whole new respect for how many tiny holes he has to find to make that pass.
Well, one more preseason game, and then we get down to business next week, Wednesday night in Anaheim, game number 1 of 82. Looking forward to many more chats like this with you coming up. Thanks as always, Murat. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
At WPG Murat, that's Murat Atesh. And if you haven't subscribed to The Athletic already, what the hell are you waiting for? Just great content, both on the Jets for Murat, as well as the National Hockey League and so much more. You can find it over at theathletic.com.